So what if I told you there was a monster so terrifying it makes Cosmic Armor Superman look like a puppy? A monster so angry that Kratos in the Doomslayer would look like a Potara fusion of Round Bob and an apple turnover. A monster so terrifying he will literally tell you the answer to a math problem. I give you the boogeyman of boogeymen, Oryx, the Taken King. Before I start, it is Halloween at the time of me editing and putting this up on the same day, so I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope your trick-or-treating goes well. I hope your partying or whatever goes well, because I don't do that stuff. Anyway, we're gonna go off the cuff and just treat it really casually because it's Halloween. So let me go ahead and start with Oryx. So, in my previous in my previous videos, I never really covered the Dreaming City stuff accurately, or at least fully, with Oryx. I brought it up in that one redo of a versus battle I made between him and the Guardian, but I still felt like that came up a little short, and in my Oryx video, I left out certain parts because of how long the video was. So, on a certain level, this is to rectify about every mistake I made in my other Oryx videos. And also, we have some new stuff for him, so you are going to be really surprised. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and move on with the video, and, let's have at it.
You are the last hope of the light. I have taken entire worlds. You are not worthy to face me.
So let's answer the first question about ontology. Does ontology matter as a scaling end? Yes. For the 100,000th time, on like another one of my videos, yet again I say this, yes, ontology matters. It was name dropped again in the latest series of the Books of Sorrow on the first chapter when Eris Morn literally said the ontology of Hive Magic. It is a thing in Destiny, it scales somewhere. No, it is not fake. Ishtar Collective is not fake. Shut the fuck up. Besides that stupid debate, let's talk about the new stuff regarding Oryx. So, what you know is that in King's Fall, after we put down the Court of Oryx, we earned the right to fight Oryx, and then after we killed Oryx, his body was drifting through space. What we don't know was, in the attempt to absorb the solar system right before Beyond Light, and when the Traveler healed itself, it repelled the impact of the attack. The end result was Saturn was absorbed into whatever the Witness stores, whatever he takes. As a result, Oryx went to Titan. And when he went to Titan, he was left unchecked because no one tried to stop him from getting stronger, adapting, becoming more intelligent, and taking in the entire world around him, as his body was presumably dead. In Ghost of the Deep, when we find his body, it turns out he's not dead at all. Now, my theory is it's because he absorbed Riven with his taking, which is why he's not fully dead. But that's conjecture. Anyway, we find that his body is put down, and he's seemingly dead. But then when you read the armor lore, it actually reveals that when you go near his body, it's still active with the passive hacks that it's using, like the illusions of the audio and visual sort. And then not only that, during the fight, you can't even hurt his body at all. Actually, the whole fire team of 3 Guardians, all the adds there, and Samuma, no one could actually damage his body with AoE-based attacks. What happens next is even crazier. After the encounter of Sumuma and Oryx's body, we're not entirely sure on what happens next, but either his body is taken to the last city and put in secret storage, or his body is left on Titan. Regardless of whatever happened between those two things, his body is left as a type level secret, as in very few things on the top actually measure in comparison to the emergency of this secret. This leads me to believe that because of the events of Season 22, and Eris Morn was stated as the strongest Hive God, yet no one brought Oryx up, the fact that he was left unchecked all this time, even throughout the entirety of Season 22, leads me to believe that he got crazy amps along the same lines that Savathun has. But the problem is, Savathun lacks the scaling that Oryx has, because Oryx just blatantly ignores the Guardian while dead. And as I'm sure we're aware, a dead person doesn't fully scale to where they would be if they're alive. So this body of Oryx, which we can't hurt, is also possibly nerfed, which I'm willing to bet that it is. So, with all that out of the way, where do we put a hypothetical full power Oryx? If you give Oryx his entire family line, as in Oryx's whole line is alive, Crota's line is alive, Hashladoon's line is alive, the Court of Oryx is alive, nothing is disrupted, the Taken War doesn't disrupt anything, Oryx is at full power with no compassion nerf, he has his throne world and everything. If you give him all of that, you can safely put him at full power around Hive God Eris. Let me explain. Eris scales above Savathun. Savathun was not going to fight the main character, and San 14 killed her repeatedly. If you put those two events together, along with Eris Morn one-shotting Savathun at the time, along with her being stated to be the strongest, you have a clear cap for Savathun right now. The problem is, while in terms of power and hacks, Eris Morn is just fine, she cannot fight for a long period of time. She requires other people in order to keep her stable, and also, if she fights long enough while in her Hive God form, Asa will die, because Asa will not be able to contain her power forever. In the brief period of time that Asa contains Eris Morn's power, she is already taking enough damage as is. Which means if Eris were to be in her Hive God state for a long enough period of time, there is a possibility of her just shutting down and either dying because she can't contain her power, or just her going back to base form while being drained. The end result is Oryx hypothetically would be able to fight Eris Morn for a long enough period of time in order to outlast her if he doesn't outscale her within a couple minutes. This puts Oryx safely, very highly into a relevant speed and multiple layers into high outerversal / extraversal / boundless, although we don't use extraversal or boundless as terminologies.
Come for me, warrior of light. I will finish what Crota began.
For hacks, Oryx has a lot of haxes. Between him and the other two siblings, he's actually the all-rounder. He's a sword fighter, but he's also a magic user. He's extremely intelligent, but uses a lot of tactics. Not only that, but he has a form of ruthless aggression to pair along with that, which makes him a very dangerous entity to challenge in battle, along with his massive experience and power that he's gained through his multiple forms of conquest, with his power to take, which allows him to take the powers of other people and bring them into his design. He is very dangerous amongst the Hive Gods because he is solely meant to adapt to his targets. So, he has a lot of lore related to his hacks, needless to say, so I'm going to talk about the generic stuff, and then after that, talk about the more notable hacks. Let's talk about the generic stuff first. Oryx has death manipulation, where he can command you to die on the spot in his throne world. He has subjective reality. He has different other forms of reality warping, which, by the way, subjective reality is different from reality warping, but reality warping is an amalgamation of other stuff. So there's a lot of different powers that's considered reality warping, but Oryx has a lot of those kinds of powers. He has law manipulation. We know, along with the other two Hive Gods, each of the Hive Gods have a form of psychic manipulation. They each have each other's concepts, so Oryx has the other two concepts of the Hive Gods, although to a weaker extent. This is the case with the other two Hive Gods in turn. So for Oryx, he has the concepts truth, death, understanding, and what's the other one? See, I even forgot this at some level. I'm gonna leave this in. He has curiosity, understanding, death, and truth. It's those four. And then he has deception and lies, trickery from Savathun, and then he has war from Zebra Wrath. All the Hive Gods share those concepts, but they each have their own specialties that make them more powerful. Between the three, Savathun has a higher IQ, although Oryx has a higher battle IQ. I'm willing to bet Zebra Wrath has a higher battle IQ than Oryx, but Oryx probably has a higher direct IQ than Zebra Wrath. Oryx seems to be the middle ground between the three. Savathun is the curious one. Zebra Wrath is trying to force the universe to adapt to her, and Oryx tries to adapt to the universe. Oryx's goals are solely to adapt and become stronger, and to create this bloodthirsty form of a positive feedback loop where you adapt to him and he adapts to you. Oryx is an interesting character amongst the Hive Gods because he seems to have a form of specialty when it comes to adaptation, even amongst other entities and groups. Due to how he works, when we sell him in Ghosts of the Deep, he has an extremely high form of intelligence, because when you add on his battle experience and skill, which is over thousands if not millions of years, he's able to pass 10,000 years within 10 steps. So something like 10,000 years is very casual to him. Billions might be stretching it, but we are aware of the fact that the Hive Gods are multiple millions of years old. I'm willing to bet somewhere in the 9-digit range of millions of years old. I can't give you a definitive answer on that, other than the fact that we already have what the Books of Sorrow tell us, and other forms of conjecture that we have to use to make sense of it. So, needless to say, he's pretty high up there in terms of intelligence in verse. I'd place him within top 20 or top 10 or top 15. Like, he's definitely within top 20. He has causality manipulation. The universe wails in terror of him. Make of that what you will. You could consider that reality warping. You could consider that a reaction from the universe. Something Oryx places on the universe. We know he has passive hallucination hexes, where he creates audio and visual distortions, and you can't tell what's going on left or right of you. And we know it's passive because his body is in basically a dead state, and as a result, he's unable to control it or the energies within it. And we know, based off the armor lore, that there's still residual energies, meaning whatever's left is still passive. Meaning what I said earlier in the video about Oryx being nerfed may or may not just be straight up blatant. Otherwise, it's worth noting that Oryx has a sword named Willbreaker, and we don't know if he still has it, but at the time, back in Taken King, back in 2015, his sword Willbreaker bypasses this concept called liminal space, or liminality. He basically can cut you without having to pull the sword out, and it has a form of durability negation. I made the analogy of it basically being Yamato from Devil May Cry on crack. I think the analogy still holds suit here. Otherwise, Oryx has multiple forms of conceptual manipulation. I'm willing to bet he can manipulate something along the lines of platonic concepts. We don't have any platonic concept statements in Destiny, but we don't really need it to scale Destiny high enough. But the point is, he does have multiple forms of conceptual manipulation. I said before that he also has law manipulation. It's to the point of principles within his throne world. We know that someone like the War Priest can create a system of slaughter for his worm. The War Priest is a part of Oryx's court, so we know Oryx has some form of system manipulation, even if it's not primarily geared towards his worm, but it's entirely possible that it is geared towards worm, because the law of the hive and whatnot. And then you have axiom manipulation. Axiom manipulation means the very belief in things. Oryx can basically destroy these axioms. And we know he can resist axiom destroying songs because his daughters were destroying axioms in some other reality, and it just sounded like violin music to him, and he was just laughing at how powerful his daughters were and how weak they were in comparison to him also. So we know he can outright resist axiom destroying stuff along with everything I stated before. And then ontological manipulation just comes in the form of paracausality is ontological. There's multiple statements that we can use to argue that and make it consistent. Bungie tries to use that statement of ontology, although I don't know why they never just directly state it, other than like in Last Wish and like 5 or 6 or 7 other places. Like it's brought up multiple times in the lore, but it's never stated verbatim in a cutscene. Although it's stated in every other season at least for like the last 3 or 4 years, so it is reliable. So let's address the Avatar and Shade debate, because I just did the Regicide mission earlier in Destiny 1 so that I knew what was up so I didn't miss anything. So it's like this. The shades of Oryx act like they're shadows. They're extensions of him. They're meant to be killed. They're purely just for information analysis. They're just extensions of the senses. That's all the shades are. The Avatar we fought and beat was, of course, a weakened Oryx due to his compassion nerf. Whatever the hell nerfed him, but he was pretty nerfed. But the Guardian was weakened somewhat. But he was less weakened than Oryx, seeing how they were dead equal, or the Guardian was above Oryx in that encounter. Oryx then absorbed that energy from Willbreaker into himself, and then he became super giant. But it's worth noting that he has the properties of Willbreaker within himself, meaning that he either can handle those energies, or he already has those kinds of energies, and Willbreaker's energies are just an extra layer on top of that to circumvent his nerf. So, he very casually has durability negation on probably almost all of his attacks. If he doesn't just destroy you, he can like go through your durability like butter. Oryx, not only does he have this discrepancy between his avatars and his true form, it goes to the point of we have to understand that he's nerfed somewhat, and also we have to understand that his nerf is coming from the fact that, yes, Crota died and other family members died, like say his court, but he's also getting less powers, getting less amps. Although he managed to somewhat level out his nerf by absorbing Riven into himself, which we'll talk about that after this. He absorbed Riven into himself in order to counteract the loss of power he would have. So, he could be a lot more powerful, which was the whole point of the arguments I make for Oryx in that encounter, that he could have been a lot more powerful even in his true form. So, there really shouldn't be any debate on this part. The shades in the Avatar scale below Oryx. I couldn't tell you if he created an Avatar or a shade that they'd be out-of-versal. I'm willing to bet that if he put enough effort into making a physical body, it wouldn't have the same hexes or the same scaling as his true form, but I imagine it'd be similar enough to, say, Savathun outside of her throne world before she got the light. He'd still be out-of-versal that way, but, you know, it's not the same as his true power. That's all I really have to say, because I don't really want to repeat myself on the subject, other than, like, it's a little weird, but it's less complicated than you think it is. Earlier, I talked about Riven of 1,000 Voices, and how he might have inherited certain abilities from her. Let me talk about what's going on with Riven and Oryx. So, Oryx absorbed Riven sometime before during the Taken King DLC, whenever King's Fall happened. We're not sure when he had his encounter with Riven in conjunction with when we fought him, but we know it was a relative enough time frame, which is all we can give you. Oryx inherited a form of Riven's physiology, where it's an alternate dimensional physiology where you have to go inside and destroy a major organ like a heart. That's what we had to do to kill Riven. Oryx in this case managed to be exposed, and also because he was weakened and had other things happening in the lore, it was a lot easier than stated to make him reveal himself. But the problem is that we still couldn't even hurt him. It was the blights that were exploding that actually hurt Oryx. You couldn't even hurt his heart even when it was exposed. So Oryx does have a form of Riven's physiology. So make of that what you will. It means like if you stab him in the chest, you're not really stabbing him in the chest, you're just stabbing into like some alternate dimension that's not even anywhere near his organs. That's basically what it means. Now, let me talk about his immortalities and acausalities. Oryx has multiple forms of immortality. One of his forms of immortality come from Touch of Malice. Basically, he can place himself onto something and he will not die because he'll continue through that thing. Now, he has to plant himself onto the thing in order for his parasitic immortality to work, but do note that once it's established, it's like gum on your shoe. You cannot take it off. It's there for good. The way it was done through Touch of Malice was done as a trap, which was why Oryx couldn't link himself to anyone directly. Which is why we haven't really heard about that form of immortality since, other than the Touch of Malice quest from Destiny 1, which happened in the King's Fall era. Taken King, King's Fall, that era. That's when Touch of Malice happened, 2015, so pretty old. We know that another form of immortality he has is Revival, and it's conditional, let me tell you. When you're fighting Oryx, he has to recognize that you have a form of strength against him. What happened was we had to prove that we had a form of strength by killing his court before we challenged him in battle. Because of the fact that he has total omniscience within his throne world, meaning he doesn't have omniscience outside of it, he knows everything that's going on and he saw it all that was happening. So, Oryx expected us to have a form of strength when we fought him, which was the reason why we was able to hurt him and actually kill him in the first place. Oryx doesn't recognize your form of strength. If that were to happen, and you were to kill him, he would revive. Oryx has to recognize the form of strength that you have over time in order for you to gain the right to truly put him down. That's what happens with that. Oryx is a philosopher of the sword logic, where like might makes right, and where he wants to spread his philosophy of like the witness throughout the entire universe. That's the whole reason why his immortality works the way it is. And he can revive infinitely. And it's not the fact that he can revive, it's how many times he's revived and what he's adapted to. I've mentioned that he has multiple concepts, but let me tell you, him and Zivur Wrath and Savathun killed each other millions if not billions of times collectively, so they've adapted to about anything under the sun. Oryx cannot die to spherical objects, planets cannot kill him, he mostly just resists that, or it mostly just doesn't hurt him at all. So if you kill Oryx with a blast, it cannot be spherical, it has to be a cylinder type blast, or it has to be something like a Kamehameha or something like that. A spherical attack will not kill him. So ironically, a Kamehameha would do more damage to Oryx than a Spirit Bomb would. It's a weird form of resistance. Now, I'm willing to bet Oryx died to multiple forms of magic before, or Annihilator Totems, or Incantations, or Death Manipulation. So he has millions, if not billions, of forms of adaptation, and or negation, and or resistance to multiple forms of offense. There's simply just a lot of powers that the Hive Gods have, and a lot of characters have. There's also the fact that Oryx mostly ignores every subclass, so yeah, they take in every debuff that every subclass of the Light has. Volatile, Weakening, Suppressing, Ignition, Scorch, Healing, Restoration. Arc debuffs don't work on Oryx either. Blinding obviously wouldn't work, so any form of arc blind, even ontologically, he ignores that. Jolting Oryx, so attacking him atomically or molecularly, that doesn't work. So stuff like stopping his heart, even if he was more mortal, that wouldn't work. Korea, while having like 100 years of prep, tried replicating Oryx. You cannot replicate Oryx, that's been tried. He has like a form of negation against that entirely, and his resistance and or negation to that increased when he fought Korea again. Although I imagine that's when it happened in the Books of Sorrow, because it was in the second fight Oryx had with Korea, which is where that fully took place. I imagine Oryx still had that kind of resistance before, but after that fight with Korea, where they met the second time, his resistances likely increased to that type of thing due to the fact that he recognized the Vex as a unique opponent of sorts. Another mechanic with Oryx's adaptation is if he recognizes that you are a unique kind of opponent and he hasn't adapted to you before, his body will mechanically prioritize itself to create a resistance and or negation to your attack or attacks. So it's worth noting that while you can put Oryx down with an attack that he's vulnerable to, you have to do it quickly, otherwise it will not work on him. He will quickly become immune or at least very resistant to it. I mentioned acausality, and I also mentioned his immortality earlier, and I recalled a few. You obviously know that he has the revival and the parasitic immortality, and then you know that he has war and all those other forms of hexes. But Oryx has a state where in true death, if you invoke his name, which is curiosity and understanding, you could actually just revive him from the dead straight up. Now, I don't know if you could revive him from the dead using Savathun or Xivu or Raf's concepts, but we know it's at least the case for Oryx's concepts. And then another thing, while you could say this is a form of conjecture, Oryx does technically have a form of transcendental death immortality, where he has Riven's power of just transcending death outright. Bungie seems to be hinting to that very heavily with how he found his body and how they're treating him at present. So even though he may have technically lost Riven and how she made that deal with him, it seems like he isn't truly dead, and for whatever reason you want to assign to it, he clearly has a very potent form of immortality. Other than that, his acausality, he has type 5 acausality, where it's basically just out-reversal physics type acausality, and then he has a form of type 4 acausality, where he only exists in this timeline mechanically. Now, there is a debacle where there's an infinite amount of versions of him, but the problem is there's one time where he was mortal and one time where he was causal. So those infinite timelines would have versions of him when he was causal, but Oryx the character, once he obtains his true power, he truly becomes a distinct entity within that timeline and or universe. Now, I also mentioned that he has truth manipulation. Let me tell you, if he says you're going to get hit by a bus and die, you are literally going to be on the street and get hit by a bus and die. If he says that you're fiction to him, you're literally fiction to him. If he says you're a lie, you are a lie to him. He can designate something being true or designate something being false. That is as direct as can be. I don't know how else to tell you about it. The last note I want to leave about Oryx's hexes before I come off as someone who's just rambling for no reason is you can call his immortality, since it's technically conditional, either low godly or high godly. Nezarec in particular has a high godly form of immortality due to it working with chaos. I'm willing to bet that it works the same way because there's no actual distinction between chaos and how Oryx works other than Nezarec being a chaotic being. So I'm willing to bet that Oryx has high godly immortality if you want the actual potency of it. Otherwise, expect the stuff you hear for about every other character in Destiny, where you have molecular and atomic destruction, you can erase the mind, body, spirit, your existence. You can erase concepts, multiple forms of concepts. You can, of course, erase, axioms, all that other crazy stuff, and then you can erase ontology stuff, then you can erase narrative stuff. If you want to hear more about the narrative stuff, just go watch my witness videos. I quantified the witness in both videos, and on a certain level, I talk about Destiny's narrative manip. So just go watch those videos, and I'll just have them linked below anyway. The last note I want to have about Oryx, other than his potency and his immortality forms, is be very, very careful on how you scale him. Oryx is one of those characters that toes the line, the slippery slope of you are totally making a no limits fallacy for no reason, and you are literally just trying to mid-ball, arguably low-ball him. So Oryx is very context dependent. A lot of his hexes have a no limits fallacy type function, so it's important to talk about why they work the way they do and because the way they work they do, because they are conditional in some way, shape, or form, because he does not have the same power outside of his throne world. Savathun breaks the mold by having her true power outside the throne world, but having extra hacks inside the throne world. But she doesn't inherently lose power while being outside of the throne world the same way the other two hive gods do. Eris Morn breaks the mold by not having a throne world because of the way she functioned as a hive god in her time and her rivalry against Sivu Wrath. So in conclusion, Oryx has done a lot. From going from rags to riches, having an entire family line, spreading the Witness's philosophy, and getting a lot of power, adaptations, power increases, resistances, etc., etc. He's done a lot. Him versus Nezrak is actually something of a debate now. Him versus Hive God Eris is also something of a debate now. You could say he scales below Hive God Eris, but you still have to scale him to around or above Savathun. Oryx versus the main character is a debate now. And the moment Oryx wakes up, he already knows what's going to go on. He's already heard everything that's happened, because he takes in everything like a normal person, even though he's quote-unquote dead. Stuff is going to hit the fan, for sure, whenever Oryx comes back. He's going to have the power that complements him to do so. And everything that I've talked about, I want you to keep in mind the fact that Oryx just sporadically can get a random power increase if he is so overwhelmingly angry and emotional, which probably explains why there's 4 faces in his boss fight in Destiny 1 King's Fall, even though he's nerfed like balls. Very underrated character since, he's been power crept in the last year, but now he's kind of just back up to present. I imagine he's going to be slightly overrated, hopefully not. I like Oryx as a character, but I saw how people do not describe him very well, so you're welcome for talking about at least over 70% of his hexes. Anyway, that's all I really have to say. If you're new, comment away, like, share, and subscribe if you have anything, to offer. I accept conversations with new people who've been around for a while. Hit me up if you want to have a talk. Join the server if you want. Y'all are awesome. Happy Halloween. Have a good one. Peace. That's all I gotta say. Oh well. I'm really bad. Fuck it.